I arrived at the Grand Hearthstone Hotel just as the sun dipped below the horizon, its final rays painting the sky in hues of crimson and orange. The building stood at the edge of a forgotten town, its towering structure casting long shadows across the desolate streets. It wasn't my first choice for an overnight stay, but after hours of driving through back roads and losing signal on my GPS, it was the only option I had left. The moment I stepped into the lobby, an unsettling chill washed over me like walking into a cold, dark cellar. The air smelled faintly of old wood, damp stone, and something metallic, rust perhaps. A dim chandelier flickered overhead, its light failing to reach the corners of the massive room, leaving them shrouded in darkness. At the front desk stood an older man in a faded uniform, his face etched with deep lines that made him appear as ancient as the building itself. His gaze was distant, as though he was looking straight through me. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, almost like a whisper. "Checking in, are we?" he asked, his words deliberate and slow. "Yes, just for the night," I replied, trying to mask the unease creeping into my tone. He handed me a key, an actual brass key with an ornate number engraved on it. Room 313. I couldn't help but notice his hands trembling slightly as he placed it in mine. "Be sure to lock the door." "From the inside," he added, his voice dropping to a murmur that I almost didn't catch. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and disappeared through a door, behind the desk. The sudden silence in the lobby felt suffocating. I glanced around, hoping to see another guest or even a bellhop, but the place seemed eerily empty. As I made my way to the creaky elevator, I noticed a painting on the wall, a sprawling depiction of the hotel itself, but it looked wrong. The windows were dark, yet there were faint outlines of figures standing in some of them. My chest tightened. It was just a painting, I told myself. The elevator arrived with a groan, its doors sliding open painfully slow. Stepping inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted to the mirrored walls, but there was no one behind me. Still, the sensation of unseen eyes lingered, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. When the elevator finally jolted to a stop on the third floor, the hallway stretched out before me like a scene from an old horror film. Faded floral wallpaper curled at the edges, and a lone bulb flickered above, casting long shadows that seemed to dance along the floor. Room 313 was at the very end of the corridor. As I walked, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, almost as if someone else was walking just out of sync with me. I turned around quickly, but the hallway was empty, eerily, hauntingly empty. Finally, I reached the door. The brass numbers seemed tarnished, as if they'd been untouched for years. Sliding the key into the lock, I hesitated. The moment the door creaked open, an overwhelming feeling of dread swept over me. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the nightstand. The bed was neatly made, but something about the room felt off. The air was heavy, and there was a faint scent of lavender, mixed with something sharper, something bitter. As I stepped inside, I froze. On the desk by the window, there was a handwritten note. "Welcome to room 313. You're not alone." I stared at the note for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would burst through my chest. The scrawled letters, uneven and jagged, seemed to mock me in their simplicity. "You're not alone." I forced a nervous laugh, trying to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe the old man at the desk had a strange sense of humor. I placed the note back on the desk, but my fingers trembled so much it slipped and fluttered to the floor. As I bent down to pick it up, I noticed something odd. The faint scent of lavender I had detected earlier was stronger here, almost overpowering. Shrugging it off, I locked the door, just as the desk clerk had suggested, and decided to settle in. The room was oppressively quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak, every distant murmur. I reached for the remote to turn on the television, hoping the noise would drown out the unease curling in my stomach. The TV flickered to life, static hissing across the screen. I flipped through the channels, but all I got was the same snowy interference. Frustrated, I turned it off and leaned back against the headboard. That's when I noticed it, the closet door. It was slightly ajar. I didn't recall it being open when I walked in. My gaze locked onto the dark gap between the door and the frame, my imagination running wild with possibilities. Was someone hiding in there? My pulse quickened, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. Summoning what little courage I had, I swung my legs off the bed and approached the closet. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder around me. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering just above the handle. Just open it, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the hammering of my heart. With a deep breath, I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just an empty closet, its back wall lined with peeling wallpaper and a row of hangers swaying gently, as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. I let out a shaky exhale, feeling both relieved and foolish. But as I turned to walk away, I heard it. A faint, barely perceptible sound. A whisper. I froze. My ears strained to catch it again, but the room had gone completely silent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. Deciding I was officially losing my mind, I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, like a child hiding from the monsters under their bed. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, just exhaustion from the long drive. But then, the tapping started. It was soft at first, like the gentle knock of a fingertip against glass. I sat up, my eyes darting to the window. The curtains were drawn, but the sound was unmistakable. Tap or tap or tap. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, more insistent. Swallowing my fear, I climbed out of bed and approached the window. With trembling hands, I pulled the curtains aside. There was nothing there, just the dark parking lot below, illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. The tapping stopped. I sighed in relief and let the curtain fall back into place. But as I turned around, I froze. The closet door was open again, wide open. I was certain I had closed it. Positive. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I backed away from it, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The room felt darker, heavier, as if the walls were closing in. And then I saw it. A shadow moved across the room. No, through the room, slipping from the closet to the far corner, where the lamp flickered weakly. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The shadow stopped, lingering just beyond the reach of the lamp's light. And then, as if it sensed my terror, it began to move toward me. In that moment, all rational thought evaporated. I grabbed my bag, fumbled with the lock, and threw the door open. I didn't care about leaving my belongings behind or even checking out properly. I just needed to get out. As I stumbled down the hallway, the oppressive silence of the hotel seemed to mock my hurried footsteps. The elevator was too slow, so I raced down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I burst into the lobby, it was empty. No sign of the old man, no other guests, nothing but the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. I ran to my car and didn't stop until I was miles away from that cursed place. But even now, as I write this, I can still feel it, that shadow, watching, waiting, and I'll never forget the note on the desk in room 313. You're not alone. I wish I could say I left that nightmare behind as I sped away from the Grand Hearthstone Hotel. But something changed that night. Something I couldn't escape, no matter how far I drove. It started about 20 minutes down the road. The headlights of my car illuminated the dark, empty highway ahead, but my mind was still trapped in that room, replaying every sound, every shadow. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight, my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, sitting in the back seat. And then it happened. The radio, which I hadn't even turned on, crackled to life. Static blared through the speakers, making me jump so violently I nearly swerved off the road. My heart pounded as I fumbled with the knobs, trying to turn it off, but the static only grew louder, more distorted. Amidst the chaos of noise, a voice emerged, a low, guttural whisper that sent chills racing down my spine. Turn. Back. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop on the deserted road. The voice repeated clearer this time. Turn. Back before it's too late. No, I muttered to myself, shaking my head. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until the static cut out completely, leaving only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your skin crawl. I sat there for a moment, staring at the radio as if it might come to life again. My hands trembled as I put the car in gear and started driving, faster this time. I told myself it was over, that I'd imagined the whole thing, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't notice the lights until they were right behind me. At first, I thought it was another car, a pair of headlights shining in my rearview mirror. But as I glanced back, I realized something was wrong. The lights weren't coming from a car. They were too high, too bright, and they didn't seem to follow the road. They floated, almost like they were hovering. I pressed the accelerator, my speed climbing as the lights grew closer. They seemed to pulse, flickering in and out like a heartbeat. And no matter how fast I went, they stayed right behind me. Panic gripped me as I reached a fork in the road. Without thinking, I swerved onto the smaller, unmarked path, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The lights hesitated for a moment before following, their glow casting eerie shadows through the trees. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the woods. My breath came in short gasps, and my hands were slick with sweat. I could feel the weight of the lights pressing down on me, their unnatural glow illuminating the forest in ghostly hues. And then they disappeared. Just like that, the lights vanished, leaving me in darkness. I slowed the car, my headlights barely cutting through the thick fog that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. My ears rang with the absence of sound, the oppressive silence broken only by the hum of the engine. I should have kept driving. I should have turned around and never looked back. But something compelled me to stop, to step out of the car and into the night. As soon as I opened the door, the smell hit me. It was the same scent from the hotel room. Lavender, sharp and bitter, like it had been rotting in the air. I took a few hesitant steps, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. The fog swirled around me, thick and heavy, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the distance, a figure. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The figure seemed to come closer, but I couldn't make out any details. It was just a shadow, darker than the night around it. I stumbled backward, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were wading through molasses. And then the voice returned. This time, it wasn't coming from the radio. It was everywhere, all around me, whispering in a dozen overlapping tones. "Turn back. You shouldn't have left. Room 313. My chest tightened, and I gasped for air, my vision blurring as the figure loomed closer. It raised an arm, or what I thought was an arm, and pointed at something behind me. Against every fiber of my being, I turned to look. The car. It wasn't empty. Through the fogged-up windshield, I could see the faint outline of a figure sitting in the driver's seat. My heart dropped, and my stomach twisted as I realized the figure was staring straight at me. And then it smiled. I don't know how I made it back to the car, but the next thing I remember, I was driving, faster than I thought possible, tearing through the woods and praying the path would lead me back to the main road. The figure was gone, the lights were gone, but the fear remained, clawing at my chest like a wild animal. When I finally emerged from the forest, I didn't stop. I didn't slow down until I saw the first gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly in the distance. I stumbled inside, gasping for breath, and the clerk behind the counter gave me a strange look. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. But as I reached into my pocket for my wallet, I froze. There, crumpled and stained, was the note from room 313. "You're not alone." I sat in my car outside the gas station, clutching the note from room 313. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold it steady. The words stared back at me, mocking my fragile sanity. "You're not alone." I don't remember how long I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every logical part of my brain told me to throw the note away, to drive as far as possible and never look back. But something inside me, a sick, gnawing curiosity, refused to let it go. I couldn't leave without answers. With trembling hands, I unfolded the note completely, hoping for some clue, some explanation. And there it was, a faint outline of numbers and letters, as if written in invisible ink. I held it up to the dim light of the gas station sign, and the message became clear. 313 belongs to her. A chill ran down my spine. Who was her? Was she the figure I'd seen in the woods? The shadow that had haunted me since I left the hotel? The thought made my stomach turn, but I knew there was only one way to find out. Against all reason, I turned the car around and headed back to the Grand Hearthstone Hotel. The drive felt like an eternity, the roads eerily empty as if the world itself had fallen asleep. When I finally reached the hotel, the towering structure loomed over me, shrouded in darkness. The once inviting glow of its windows was now cold and menacing, and the lavender scent hung in the air stronger than ever. The lobby was deserted. No clerk, no guests, not even the faint hum of background music. It was as if the building was holding its breath, waiting for me to take the next step. I made my way to the staircase, avoiding the elevator this time. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound echoing through the empty halls. When I reached the third floor, I hesitated. The hallway stretched out before me, a long corridor lined with identical doors. At the end of it, room 313 stood waiting. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. My breathing grew shallow, and my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. When I finally reached the door, I froze. It was already open. Inside, the room was exactly as I had left it, except for one detail. The mirror on the far wall, which had been spotless before, was now smeared with handprints. They were small, almost childlike, and they covered the entire surface, overlapping in chaotic patterns. I stepped inside, my every nerve screaming at me to turn back. The lavender scent was suffocating now, and I could feel a presence in the room, something watching me. And then I saw her. She was standing in the corner, her back turned to me. Her hair was long and matted, her dress tattered and stained. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the air around her seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Slowly she turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to pull me in, and her lips curled into a twisted smile. "You shouldn't have left," she said, her voice echoing like a distant scream. "This room is mine." I stumbled backward, my legs giving out as I fell to the floor. She took a step closer, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "You tried to leave," she continued, her tone filled with both anger and sorrow. "But no one leaves, not without her." Her? Was she talking about herself or someone else? My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the mystery, but it was too late. The room began to shift around me, the walls closing in and the floor trembling beneath my hands. Shadows poured from the corners, twisting and writhing like living things. And in the midst of it all, her voice rose, a chilling wail that pierced my very soul. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her face inches from mine. "Stay, and you'll understand." I don't remember how I escaped. One moment I was on the floor, surrounded by darkness, and the next I was running. Down the stairs, through the lobby, and out into the cold night air. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, the engine roaring as I sped away from the hotel for the second time. But even as the building disappeared in my rearview mirror, I knew I hadn't truly left. The lavender scent still lingered, faint but unmistakable. And when I glanced at the passenger seat, my blood ran cold. The note was there, folded neatly, as if it had never left my pocket. But this time, the message had changed. "You're hers now.